Let me know when. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm guessing that my voice is going out onto the patio. We still have a few coming in from our lovely lunch. Thank you, Susan and Jane, for making that happen one more time, and to Tony and Colleen for your registration help, and everyone who puts pieces of this together. It's such a nice opportunity to get together on a beautiful, somewhat chilly December day. So this is our Saints Alive program for December, and the name of the program is I Treasure This Book. And we have this wonderful group of parish members who are readers who are going to be sharing with us a little bit about books that they have particularly enjoyed this year. And so we'll get started with that in a minute. And then also we're grateful that Diesel Books the Diesel Bookstore, which is located at the Brentwood Country Mart, is also with us to present a little bit about books for young people, for those of us who like to read books for young people or like to give them as gifts. So I'm going to do a brief prayer of thanks and then turn this over to our host, who is Dan Keatinge, who is sitting in the middle of the table, pondering. So the Lord be with you. Let us pray. Our gracious God, you fill our lives with friendship and learning and sharing and joy. There are so many ways in which we are blessed. Thank you for this day and for this time together and for the opportunity to speak to one another about things that have been interesting and life-giving to us. Thank you for the food that we've eaten. Help us to be nourished by that and in so many other ways so that we may more faithfully serve you. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, Dan, it's yours.
Thank you all for coming to this Saints Alive Book Fair 2.0. We decided when we were discussing planning this year that we would experiment with having some of our own parishioners talk about books that impacted them during the year. And we've got quite an array of different books, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to contemporary fiction. So I'm sure you'll find something that you'll want to read. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Judy Jones to start, and she's going to be talking about Margaret Renkl, Late Migrations and Graceland.
Well, Christmas is the time for gifting, and nothing is nicer than a book gift. I'm sure the Diesel people will agree. I have been given many books over my lifetime. Most of them were wonderful, but occasionally I've gotten a book that I thought, why on earth that? So when I was thinking about this, I chose Margaret Renkl because I have given her on several occasions, and it has been so well received. In fact, one of the giftees is here today, and I know that she liked it because she read it and re-gifted it to her daughter, which is good. And then secondly, I gave a copy to a good friend who is also herself a writer, and at her next literary dinner party, she gave a copy to each guest, including a Pulitzer Prize winner. So that's a pretty good recommendation. Margaret Renkl, her books are Late Migrations, A Natural History of Love and Loss, Graceland at Last, Notes on Hope and Heartache from the American South. Margaret Renkl is an essayist, and her essays appear regularly in the New York Times on the opinion pages. Her first one was in 2015, and it was about mourning the loss of a loved one. In 2017, she was asked to write a regular column on politics, culture, flora, and fauna of the American South. And coincidentally, her latest one appeared this morning in the New York Times on the opinion page, entitled Wildlife Rescue Heals the Human Heart. There's something in all of us that responds to the suffering of another living being. So Her essays range from, as I say, flora and fauna to politics and culture. And they're written from a liberal perspective, which she points out in the Deep South is not as unusual as you might expect. But she also writes about herself, about growing up in rural Alabama, her loving family, her closeness to all of them from several generations back in historical records to the present day. They are funny, laugh out loud funny. They are so touching that they bring a tear. But always, always, they are beautifully written and lyrical. And so I'd like to read you just a brief excerpt from one of them. This is entitled, Redbird Sundown. The light catches in the bare branches of the maple and clothes it in a fleeting dream of autumn, all pink and auburn and gold. The cardinal, perched near the top of the tree, bursts into radiance, into flame, and for that moment, nothing matters at all, not the still soil, nor the clattering branches, nor the way this redbird will fall to the ground in time, a cold stone. And I too will grow cold and all my line. Never mind, mind only this tree in winter and this redbird, this tiny God, all fiery light, leading to him and gathered in him, this Lord of the sunset, this greeter of the coming dark. So that's Margaret Renkl. Thank you, Dan.
The book I'm talking about is called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And when I read the title, I didn't know what to expect, but I knew that I needed to read it. And the author is a British writer, and his thesis is that various forms of social media, from Google to Facebook to Instagram, they have all tended to break up our attention, in contrast to reading a book, for example. He writes in a recent interview in the New York Times, with this book, I could feel my own attention getting worse. Things that required deep focus, that were core to my sense of self, like reading books and having deep conversations, were getting more and more like running up a down escalator. I could still do them, but they were getting harder, and I could see this happening to most people that I know. Incidentally, if you think this is a problem limited to young people, I recently saw an article headline, How to Get Grandpa Off His iPhone. But he talks about the quality of attention that is associated with reading books, for example, or having a deep conversation, and contrasting that to how we think most of the time when all this data is coming at us from different directions. And we've gotten habituated to checking our email, many of us, way too many times a day. And that's not an accident. It's a result of conditioning. The people who developed these systems, they knew exactly what they were doing, because this whole phenomenon, you may remember from college psychology, the mouse pressing the lever to get something, and clicking is an awfully lot like that mouse, and it's reinforcing. Let me just read a little bit of what he says about books, because it's so powerful. This is in a chapter entitled "The Collapse of Sustained Reading." For the first time in modern history, less than half of Americans read literature for pleasure. It has been less well studied, but there seems to be similar trends in Britain and other countries. Between 2008 and 2016, the market for novels fell by 40%. In one single year, paperback fiction sales collapsed by 26%. And he references a psychologist with an unpronounceable long name who did research on what he describes as flow, which is that particular state of mind that we all have experienced when we are completely engaged in the task and sort of ego recedes into the background. And he contrasts that with the quality of attention that we experience in our electronic world. The most common form of flow that people experience in their lives is reading a book. Like other forms of flow, it is being choked off in our culture of constant distraction. Now, lest this sound too depressing, he does have some solutions, but he thinks the first step is to raise our own consciousness about what's actually happening, that there are large institutions, economic actors that are benefiting from our constant connection to media. He talks, for instance, about Facebook. And he says there's 4 things you need to know about Facebook. Number 1, it's about how you look on Facebook. Number 2, it's about how you look on Facebook. Number 3, it's about how you look on Facebook. And number 4 is, how do other people feel about how you look on Facebook? So he talks about making a pre-commitment to stop switching tasks so much. This notion that we can multitask is actually a complete misunderstanding of neurobiology. We can only think about one thing, really, at a time. So saying, oh, I'm multitasking, not a good idea. He says, I've changed the way I respond to my own sense of distraction. I used to reproach myself and say, you're lazy. Now, I have a very different conversation with myself. I ask, what could you do now to get into a flow state, access your mind's own ability to focus deeply? Now, the third thing he recommends is going off for months at a time without your cell phone and taking a bunch of books with you, which is something that he actually did. And he describes the remarkable change in his mood and enjoyment of life after the first 2 weeks of, where's my cell phone? It was a state of mind that he wanted to get back to. Letting your mind wander, taking a walk without your phone every day. Sleep, get at least 8 hours of sleep. And then he talks about the need for greater social awareness of how this is happening, how this is impacting not only us, but our children. And it's a fascinating and disturbing book, which makes me a little more mindful of when I look at my cell phone, at least for a few weeks since I've read this book. Thanks. Catherine Keefe.
Actually, I have something to follow up. I'm kind of going to go rogue here. I'm going to be talking about Gilgamesh, which is, hope you don't nod off, but I feel guilty. Look what I'm sitting here. It's just because I can't find my purse, which is under my chair. But right along the lines of what Dan was talking about, there is a podcast that a psychologist and educator sent me. It's Ezra Klein, and he's interviewing Marianne Wolf, who's a professor at UCLA, and it's called The Reading Mind, and it is mind-blowing, really. It is. I've listened to it twice. There's so much in it. I've sent it to all my children, and I pray they read it. It discusses some of the things about the pitfalls of social media and many of the things that Dan's book mentioned and that Dan mentioned. And then secondly, I just want to say that I'm always disturbed by the fact that fiction sort of seems to be getting a short shrift, just as sort of the humanities do. And it wasn't for that reason that I chose Gilgamesh. I chose Gilgamesh because I was reading it and involved with it at the time when I found out that one of my favorite books of fiction had already been dibsed by Marcy. So out of perversely, I just thought, you're going to get Gilgamesh. By the way, how many people have heard of Gilgamesh or have ever read anything in school with it? Aha, great. Well, Gilgamesh, it was a bestseller for years, and I probably have the only bestseller of all the choices here, but it was the bestseller for about 4,000 years. It was about 6,000 years old. And it has come through, it was written in Sumerian way back in the 4th millennium, and it's just gone into Babylonian, Akkadian, Assyrian, all kinds of languages, and it was found on cuneiform tablets or little cylinders when they excavated Nineveh in the 1800s, and they were found to stash underneath. Because they're clay, they survived all the fire and brimstone. They were translated, and it just came to take people by surprise. It was so fascinating. Anyway, more and more things come to light, and so as a result of recent translations and recent discoveries, we have this, which was just published this year, Gilgamesh, by an Assyriologist and a very, very cute 30-year-old Danish guy. I was on a Zoom call with him, and I would buy it probably because of him, but I'd already bought it. But his name is Sophus Hele, and he is just darling. And but he is really amazing, and he has got the most recent kind of situation of translation and lines and so forth. It's very complex because there are a lot of broken text. But the price of this book is worth even just the essays. They're very readable, they're very fun, and they give you all the background. This book, Stephen Mitchell, which is often, he's a poet who's often read, he has some great translations of Rilke. He has done a wonderful translation of Gilgamesh, and he kind of makes it more poetry. Although, what's-his-face, Sophus, with his father, who's a poet, they did the work on the translations. So anyway, the story of Gilgamesh, for those who don't know, just real fast. He's a hero who's part divine, part human. He is head of Uruk, a walled city, and he is just super duper, and he gets a little bit too big for his britches. And he starts becoming more of a tyrant. And so his mother, who is divine, figures he needs a companion. And so he gets a companion. Because they have a big fight, and they end up really liking each other, and they become best of friends. They're both sort of, really incredible, strapping guys. They go out to take on monsters, and they go to the cedar wood, the famous cedar wood forest, and they take on Humbaba, a really big bad monster. And they manage to conquer Humbaba, take his head back, and they bring it to Uruk. And on the way back, a goddess falls in love with Gilgamesh, and he realizes that she's no good for him, and so he spurns her. She gets very angry and sends another kind of monstrous bull to terrorize Uruk. Gilgamesh and his sidekick get rid of the bull, and they, a little bit out of revenge, say some terrible things to the goddess, who gets so mad that she has his sidekick, who's his very, very best friend, alter ego almost, die. And Gilgamesh is absolutely overcome with grief. He can't get over it, and he seeks the meaning of life and the fountain of youth. And he searches and searches and searches, and unfortunately for him, he doesn't find the answer. But he goes through these trials and tribulations, and he's finally made to accept that he's mortal, and he goes back to Uruk and supposedly is reconciled. Now, this sounds like a pretty good normal storyline, come on. But what's really interesting about it is that it is so human. The trials and tribulations, the feelings he's got, the things that he faces and his sidekick face are everyday things that we face. The book is full of, just like any good novel, sex, murder, comfort, companionship, community, self-doubt, self-knowledge, all of these things. And it is so well layered that you can read it once and you can go back and read it again and again and again. And because this was translated by Nebuchadnezzar, had his scribes translate it, it was also written in Babylonian. And of course, we know that the Jews who in their exile were very much acquainted with things that were going on in Babylon. And we see lots of things that come in, all right. And one is the flood, and also the serpent. If he had been able to trick the serpent, he might have been able to find the secret of youth. So we see these things in other ways that come through. And so this is wonderfully readable. This is wonderfully interesting, and the two of them have really kind of put this back on the map. I recommend this especially if you had a small reading group of people who are really committed, because you can keep reading it and talking about it, sort of like our Bible study group. It's really worth it. And I'm going to go rogue one more time and say there's a great book called Nothing Remains the Same by Wendy Lesser, which is the joy of rereading. And that is going back after a certain point, rereading something, and the self-knowledge you get from the two perspectives is just really worth it. Just as reading this at a certain time in your life is really, as well, I think, very, very rewarding. So, okay.
Thank you, Catherine. You know, in talking about a book that was written 4,000 years ago, I'm reminded of a comment that I heard a psychologist make about the human brain. He said, the brain that we've got is about the same as it was 80,000 years ago, and there's no plan for an upgrade. So it's like, well, some themes are perpetual. So now Paul is going to talk about a different book, The Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty.
Well, thank you, Dan, for this chance to talk about the book.
Are you on?
Oh. Can you hear me now? Oh, excellent. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this book. It came out just last year, and when Dan approached me, I immediately thought of this one because I found it to be one of the most illuminating that I've ever read. And what it is a carefully documented and intimate portrayal of the Sackler dynasty of doctors. Over 3 generations, this family was transformed from respected medical researchers into global pariahs. Now, how did this happen? It's now widely expected that they and the drug they developed, OxyContin, were the primary initiators of the opioid epidemic that is still ravaging our country. Now, even though the highly addictive nature of this drug was recognized within a few years of its introduction, the Sacklers were able to sell ever-increasing quantities for decades. They pulled this off through obsessive secrecy, scorched earth legal maneuvers, influence peddling, and high-level corruption.
And slick advertising.
And that too, and a lot of lies. Their story is often enraging, but always engrossing. A real page-turner, it reads like a detective story slant legal thriller as we follow the tactics the Sacklers used to evade any interference with their hugely lucrative operation. Stephen Colbert, on his late-night TV show, beautifully characterized the Sacklers' version of the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm, unless it's incredibly profitable, in which case, harm, harm, harm. There are many villains in the story, including prominent politicians, lawyers, and government officials. But there are heroes as well, especially the journalists and artists who brought the Sacklers' story to light. A good example is the photo artist Nan Goldin. She single-handedly organized worldwide protests that finally brought the issue into the general public's awareness. Considering how so many before her had failed, it was a remarkable accomplishment. Through her efforts, the family's enormous charitable donations were finally turned away, and their name was removed from the world's leading universities and art museums. Now, I really appreciate Patrick Keefe's writing style. I find he writes with clarity, nuance, and sharp insights into the psyche of his characters and the context of their culture. In fact, the book is rich in resonances far beyond its immediate subject. How we define success, the relationship between money and respect, and more. And what I found particularly satisfying, to quote from the New York Times, even when detailing the most sordid episodes, Keefe's narrative voice is calm and admirably restrained, allowing his prodigious reporting to speak for itself. Now, I would read the book first, but for the video version, there's an Emmy Award-winning miniseries on Hulu called Dopesick, starring Michael Keaton. Also, Alex Gibney produced a documentary for HBO with the appropriate title, Crime of the Century. So to recap, the book is Empire of Pain, The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty. The author is Patrick Keefe. It was published in 2021. Now, I find the book's jet black cover doubly appropriate. On the one hand, it evokes the shadows in which the Sackler family operated for years, and on the other, the profound loss and pain suffered by the relatives of close to 1 million victims to date who have lost their lives from opioid poisoning. Now, I can either yield my next 3 minutes to Marcy, or I can entertain questions, if there are any.
Well, one thing I read in the book was this, you talked about Nan Goldin, who's sort of an activist, and the Sacklers were giving some kind of a big benefit at the Guggenheim Museum. But Nan Goldin and her collaborators got up to the top. If you've been in the Guggenheim, you know that it goes around like that. And as all these people were gathering to adore the Sacklers, she and her cohorts dumped hundreds of prescriptions for OxyContin down into the atrium.
Yeah, they hung banners.
Any questions? All right. Now, Marcy. Oh.
Sorry, it isn't really a question. It's the same author wrote a book called Say Nothing, which is a history of the Troubles in Ireland told from the point of view of a woman who tried to save a British soldier who was dying in her front doorstep and then was disappeared the next day, leaving 8 orphan children. And it was an unsolved mystery crime from 1969. And he, in this book, tries to solve the crime, which he does. He's an incredible investigative journalist and a beautiful writer. So that's another book by the same author as wrote Empire of Pain, and it reads like a mystery thriller and gives you a picture of 40 years of the Troubles in Ireland.
Yeah, won several awards too, as I recall.
So now Marcy Moore is going to talk about two books, one by Jean Korelitz called The Latecomers, and the other by Bonnie Garmus, Lessons in Chemistry.
Okay. Well, when I was asked to do this, I chose these two books mainly because I could remember them. That was very helpful. But it also, I do read a lot, and I find, and I enjoy the books, but these are two that really did stick in my mind. Lessons in Chemistry might be a historical novel for some people, but it was actually a time when I was alive and about the same age as the main character. And both of the books I'm talking about are books of character. This one takes place in the late 50s to early 60s. And the character, Elizabeth Zott, is a chemist. And she's a unique person in that she's unconventional, but she doesn't understand conventions. So she just goes her own way, and she's in this field at that time that would be very unlikely for a woman to be in, chemistry. She finally has a meeting of the minds with another chemist, and they live together and they have a baby, but they don't see the reason to get married. Unfortunately, he's killed after about 3 years. They have a baby. And so there she's a single mother at the beginning of the 60s. And she's still working as a chemist, but even though she's brilliant, she's kind of marginalized. So through a series of flukes, she ends up being a television celebrity and a cook. And before this, she's actually made her kitchen into a lab. She has beakers and all kinds of things. And when she gives her show, which becomes very, very popular, she speaks of water as H2O, and it's all very, she's very serious about it. But she ends up enabling women to move out of the kitchen and into whatever dreams they had. And it sounds like a very serious book, but it is serious in some ways. But I was trying to think of how I could explain more how the lightness of the book is. And so I read this little excerpt from, it was a Minnesota show, and it said, if you could think of Julia Child channeling a light bit of I Love Lucy, along with a serious part of Madame Curie, you get the idea of this book. So of all the books, I've sometimes recommend them to people, and I have not found one person that didn't like it. So I highly recommend it if you're looking for a gift. I think most people would really like it, even men, believe it or not. So the other book, is, that, by the way, that was this woman's first novel. She was a copywriter, and this is her first book, Lessons in Chemistry. The next one is a very established writer. She's written other bestsellers. And this one is really a family saga. It starts out with a young man at 19 who rolls his Jeep and kills his best friend and his girlfriend. And one of the girlfriend's friends later on meets him and decides it's her mission to heal him. She's a caregiver type. And so they marry, and she wants to have a family more than anything, but she's not able to conceive. So in the very days of in vitro, they freeze 4 embryos, and 3 of them are implanted, and she has triplets. So she has now it's a very wealthy New York family. She has this lovely family, everything she wants. The triplets never like each other. It's not the family she hoped for. Her husband becomes more and more remote. And then it skips, and you get to the triplets in college. And in the second part of the book, two of them are at Cornell, and one is at a very avant-garde type school in somewhere, I think maybe New Hampshire, I forget. But I remember most of it. Anyway, it's a very rich, complex novel having to do with characters who actually change. The plot isn't. It's really not the plot. It's how these people view themselves, the dreams they have that may or may not be real, the way the interaction between the triplets kind of influences the way they see themselves. Most people, I think, that have liked this book. I know one person did not like it because they just didn't like the people. Because you do get involved with the people, and if you really hate the people, you won't like the book. But it's really worth reading. One complaint I did hear was too long. Well, it's exactly 45 pages longer than Lessons in Chemistry, and no one complained about that. But you do need to have time to read. This is not a fast read, and you have to think about it. So I also really recommend it, but not to a real busy person, because they won't have time.
Can you remind us of the title?
Yeah.
Marcy, can you remind us of the
Oh,
title?
it's called The Latecomer by Korelitz. The Latecomer. She also wrote the plot, if any of you read that. Yeah, and both of these books, by the way, apparently are going to be made into some sort of film. So I highly recommend you read them first, because I don't see any way that Lessons in Chemistry can really be put on film. You have to read it.
Okay, all right. Oh, wait.
What do you mean
I'm
reference?
going to hog Marcy's 3 minutes from Paul. The latecomer is the fourth of the embryos that comes late, and so she.
Oh, I didn't want to say that because I didn't know that till halfway through.
Well, you've got to say that. You've got
I
to say.
thought you guys could find that out for yourselves.
No,
I'm reading
you
this
can't.
book saying, what the heck is this? Why is it called
No.
The Latecomer?
Well, so I spoiled it, but it really is so. It is great, and the thing that is wonderful is that it's very satirical, very, very satirical, and yet you've really got wonderful characters. And it has so much, it's so timely, sorry, Marcy, so timely because of the in vitro and the surrogacy and all of that, and what it means, and how these kids who are from in vitro, how they think about it. So that's all.
Oh, I just want to point out that I taught first and second grade. She taught Latin.
One of the studies that Johann Hari talks about in Stolen Focus is they did a study of a large population of readers, and they identified who read fiction and who read mostly nonfiction. And of course, psychologists have these weird tests to try to figure out who's empathic. And one of the ways they do that is by just showing photos of people's eyes and seeing who can identify what that person is feeling. And it turns out that people who read fiction seem to be more empathic than those of us who read nonfiction.
You mean women?
And our friends from Diesel tell me that Lessons in Chemistry is really selling well. And on that note, I'd like to ask Barbara Edelman, who's from Diesel, to talk about some other offerings that are available outside.
I just want to say the favorite book I've read all year was Lessons in Chemistry, so I applaud that. It's charming. It's just great. Okay, well, this is going to be a down and dirty recap of our children's selections for Christmas. So starting with young adults, Enola Holmes' Elegant Escapade. Enola Holmes is the young girl version of Sherlock Holmes, and she is his younger, feistier sister, and she returns. This is like the fourth book in the series, in an adventure of a confused young baronet's daughter who is on the run from her father's devious schemes. It's perfect for any very good reader, like fifth grade on, sixth grade on. All My Rage is a National Book Award winner. All My Rage is a love story, a tragedy, and an infectious teenage fever dream about what home means when you feel that you don't fit in. I would say that that probably cants a little older, so, junior high school age. The Paper Girl of Paris is a history book, a fiction book. It's about World War II. It has a little time travel thing in it. It has gotten rave reviews. Get ready to be transported to Paris in Taylor's incredible debut novel. So I think that would be a great one for a young girl who is like Belle in, what's the Disney movie with Belle and Beauty and the Beast? Great reader. And then finally in the young adult category, and also old adult such as myself, Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, which has recently been made into a movie, but is one of the most charming novels about an ordinary woman whose life is transformed by one beautiful dress. And that was written after World War II, and it's got a real pleasant, charming kind of thing. So if you want a little escape, I recommend that. Okay, 8 to 12-year-olds, Vampire Vacation. The spooky summer adventure of the sinister Winterbottom twins continues in another Gothic mystery. So this is perfect for fans of Lemony Snicket, Edward Gorey, and Roald Dahl. I would say boys or girls could read this, and again, middle school readers. Wild Oak by C.C. Harrington. Give the gift of connection this holiday season with this lushly illustrated story of a girl and a snow leopard and their unlikely friendship. In alternating voices, Wild Oak shimmers with beauty, compassion, and unforgettable storytelling as it explores the delicate interconnectedness of the human, animal, and natural worlds. I think I would give that to a real reader, not what we used to call a reluctant reader, I don't think. Okay. And then Matt Haig, one of my favorite authors, has a boxed Christmas gift set, and he has, I think it's 3 or 4 Christmas stories for young kids. I think you could read them to someone who's like second grade on, and then older kids can read it to themselves. A Boy Called Christmas, The Girl Who Saved Christmas, and A Mouse Called Mika. Matt Haig has a really good heart, and his books are very elevating, so I think they would be a pleasure. 7 years old and up, graphic novels. The Cat Kid Comic Club by Dav Pilkey. And this is just really fun, flies off the shelves at the bookstore, and it's the newest iteration in this incarnation, maybe, in this series. And then the Magic Treehouse boxed set. So I don't know if all of your kids or grandkids have read the Magic Treehouse. Those are the beginning chapter books for first, second, third grade. And they're historical to Magic Treehouse, and Jack and Annie go into the treehouse and can go back in time and all through history. But now they've turned it into a graphic novel. So that would appeal to any age, really, I think. Okay, picture books for the very littlest of giftees. Yetis Are the Worst and Los Angeles Baby. These are 2 really good, hot-selling, recent picture books. So if you have a picture book reader, I would say that would be good. Then we have a lot of Christmas books. So these are all picture books as well. A Very Mercy Christmas, which is Mercy Watson. I don't know if you all know Mercy Watson, but she's a little pig, and she's hugely popular, and your kids and grandkids have seen these books in their libraries, and and so this is a new one. Mr. Willoughby's Christmas Tree, an oldie but a goodie. Bluey, Hooray, It's Christmas. Bluey is a cartoon dog, and it's a little picture book about Christmas called Hooray, It's Christmas. And then there's a really funny writer, David Milgram, who writes books for people that are just learning to read, but they're witty and not like The Cat Sat on the Mat, but things that are funny. And the one he's got for Christmas is called See Santa Nap. So if you have a beginning reader, especially little boys, would particularly like this. Then we have Mariah Carey, The Christmas Princess. And that's just a really girly, charming, Christmassy, fun picture book. And then we have the Stocking Stuffer board book for little hands that might like a stocking stuffer board book. And Reindeer is Here. And Reindeer is Here is a book plus a stuffed animal, and it's going to be a television special on CBS. So it's like a tie-in. And then we have one last thing, which is if you have a grandchild or a child who's going to be traveling in the car with you, we have a laugh out loud holiday gift book for kids called Would You Rather? So it's something they can do instead of asking, are we there yet? And that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Barbara. And I want to thank Diesel for supporting this activity. And many of the books that we've talked about are available outside, not all of them. So you can do all your Christmas shopping today. I want to thank our panelists for their presentations. I want to thank Missy and Christine for keeping me calm and in the setup process, and Arameus also for the same. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you to our fabulous presenters. This is a wonderful, interesting community with lots of great readers in it, and thanks you for sharing from what you found. I just want to give a small plug. So we take a break in January. There will not be a Saints Alive event in the beginning of January, but on February 2nd, our own Terry McCarthy will be back with us. And I already know what he's going to talk about, thanks to Jennifer. So she said, tell them. So she says, FYI, to announce at the end of the event, that's this one. Terry's talk in February will address, quote, is the world getting better or getting worse, unquote. So that's the teaser. Watch for more information. It will be Wednesday, I think it's February 2nd, or is it maybe, no, I think it's February 1st. February 1st, because even I fall back into that Thursday thing. So thank you again, and we will have fabulous holidays, everyone, and we'll all be back here on February 1st.